My name is Emma Carter. I'm 23 years old, and I live in New Orleans, a city that pulsates with music, mystery, and a warmth that sticks to your skin. It was a warm September night in 2023, and I was on Frenchman Street, that vibrant corner of the Marigny neighborhood, where jazz spills out of the bars and people dance like the world is going to end tomorrow. I'm not much of a party person, but my friend Sophie insisted that I needed to live a little. So there I was, with a glass of ice-cold lemonade in my hand, listening to a street band that mixed trumpets with a rhythm that made my heart beat faster. That's when I saw him. He was leaning against a brick wall outside the Spotted Cat, wearing a crooked smile that seemed to hold a secret. Tall, with messy brown hair and green eyes that shone even in the dim light, he looked out of place, as if he didn't belong in this chaos. His name was Liam Hayes. I know this because after we'd stared at each other for a good 5 minutes, he walked over to me. "You look like someone who knows how to pick the best music on the street," he said, his voice husky, making me laugh. "You're a natural," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. We talked for hours that night. He told me about how he worked as an antique furniture restorer, how he loved the smell of old wood, and how he had a penchant for history books. I told him about my job as an assistant at a bookstore in the French Quarter, and how I dreamed of traveling the world, but had never left New Orleans. There was an instant chemistry, something I couldn't explain, but it made me want to stay there forever. Over the next few days, Liam and I saw each other almost every day. Coffee at Café du Monde, walks through the Garden District, nights listening to live music. He was funny, thoughtful, and had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Our relationship flowed like the Mississippi, slow, deep, and with a current I didn't want to resist. But then April came. Lent, that 40-day period before Easter when the city seems to quiet down, more introspective. I've never been particularly religious, but I grew up hearing stories about Lent, a time of reflection, penance, preparation for Easter. To me, it was just a time when the streets were less crowded and the masses were longer. But to Liam, it felt like something more. In the first week of April, he started acting strangely. He would answer the phone abruptly, cancel plans without explanation. At night, he would simply disappear. I would text and call, but nothing. It was as if he would disappear with the sunset. At first, I thought it was just a phase, maybe work stress. But as the days turned into weeks, and he would reappear as if nothing had happened, I began to worry. One night, already frustrated, I decided to go to his house, a small old house in the Treem neighborhood. The door was opened by her mother, a woman in her 50s named Margaret, with tired eyes and a forced smile. I asked about Liam, saying I needed to understand why he was so distant. Margaret became tense, almost aggressive. "He's busy, Emma. It's best if you don't get involved," she said, her voice harsh. "But he disappears every night, and now, during Lent, it's as if he doesn't even exist." "I deserve to know what's going on," I insisted, feeling my anger rise. Margaret hesitated, looking around as if she feared someone was listening. "Liam loves you, girl. But there are things you don't understand. Leave him alone for now." I left with more questions than answers. In the days that followed, Liam reappeared, as always, with that smile that disarmed me. He told me he loved me, that he wanted to be with me, but that some things were complicated. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me told me there was a bigger secret, something he was hiding in the shadows of the night. After that tense conversation with his mother, Margaret, I was determined to find out why Liam disappeared every night, especially during Lent. He would reappear in the mornings, with that charming smile, telling me he loved me, but the vague excuses were starting to get to me. I needed answers. It was mid-April 2024, and Lent hung over New Orleans like a fog. The streets of the French Quarter were quieter, with church bells ringing in the distance. I spent my days at the bookstore, but my mind was always on Liam. Each night without him was a void I couldn't explain. I decided I couldn't wait any longer for him to open. If he wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I would find out for myself. One night, after closing the bookstore, I rode my bike to the Treem neighborhood. Liam's house was on a narrow street lined with ancient oak trees that swayed in the wind. I parked my bike and hid behind an old pickup truck, watching the house. The lights were off and the front door was ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. My heart was racing, but I stood there, waiting. After almost an hour, I spotted Liam. He had emerged from the house, walking quickly, almost stealthily. There was something strange about the way he looked, his shoulders tense, his eyes nervous, as if he knew he was being followed. I decided to follow him. I pedaled slowly, keeping my distance, as he cut through the dark alleys of Treem. The city at night always gave me the creeps, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Liam stopped in a vacant lot near Bayou St. John, where the grass grows wild and the silence is broken only by the sound of frogs. He stood there, staring up at the full moon, which shone like a spotlight. I hid behind a tree, trying not to make a sound. He seemed different. His breathing was heavy, and he was clutching his chest, as if he were fighting something. Suddenly, he let out a low groan, almost a growl, and ran into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I froze. My bike slipped from my hand and fell, the noise echoing in the silence. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there, and I did. I pedaled home, my heart in my throat, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. It wasn't concrete proof, but something about that moment, the sound, the way he spoke, made me feel like I couldn't explain it. It was like Liam was hiding something bigger than himself. The next day, he called me, as if nothing had happened. He wanted to meet me at Café du Monde, like old times. I was torn, but I agreed. I had to look him in the eye and ask him what was going on. When we sat down, there were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. "Liam, where were you last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He fiddled with his coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. I had to take care of some things. "It's nothing, Emma. Nothing." My voice came out louder than I'd intended, and a few people at the tables next to me glanced at me. "You disappear every night, Liam. Especially now, during Lent. I followed you yesterday. I saw you in the bayou. What's going on?" His face went pale. For a second I thought he was going to run away, but he just hung his head. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered. "It's not safe." "Then explain it to me," I insisted, crossing my arms. "Because I can't take these excuses anymore." Liam looked around, as if afraid of being overheard. "Not here," he said quietly. "Meet me tonight, on Frenchman Street, where we met. I promise I'll tell you everything." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I nodded. As I pedaled home, my chest was a mixture of anger, fear, and something I hated to admit, love. A part of me wanted to end it all, to run away from this mystery that consumed me. But another part, the one that still felt it in every beat of my heart, needed to know the truth, no matter what the cost. After seeing Liam on Bayou St. John, acting in a way that left me with more questions than courage, I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening. He'd promised to tell me the truth on Frenchman Street, where we'd met, and I was determined to listen, even as a voice inside me whispered to me to run. It was a humid April night in 2024, and Lent seemed to weigh more heavily than ever. The streets of the Marigny were crowded, but there was something in the air, a quiet, that didn't match the jazz blaring from the bars. I arrived at Frenchman Street around 9, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the music. The Spotted Cat was packed, but Liam wasn't outside. where he usually waited for me. Instead, I got a text from him: "I'll meet you in the alley behind the Blue Nile. Come alone." My first reaction was hesitation. The alleys of New Orleans at night aren't exactly the most inviting places, but curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, made me go. The alley was narrow, with moss-covered walls and faded graffiti. A single streetlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air was thick, as if a storm were brewing, though the sky was clear, the full moon shining like a watchful eye. "Liam," I called, my voice echoing in the void. Nothing. Just the distant sound of a saxophone, and the buzz of an insect flying near the streetlight. My sneakers stuck to the damp ground, and I was gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Then I heard a sound, a shuffling of footsteps, like someone was trying to be quiet, but not quite quiet enough. "Liam, this isn't funny," I said, turning on my heel. My stomach lurched as I saw a shadow move around the corner of the alley, tall and misshapen, as if it wasn't quite human. My instincts screamed at me to run, but before I could, Liam emerged from behind a stack of crates, his face pale, and his eyes wide. "Emma, you're here," he said, his voice hoarse, almost relieved. He was disheveled, his shirt ripped at the sleeve, and there was a dark stain on it that looked like blood. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Liam, what's happening? Why are you here? Why are you like this?" The words came out quickly, mixed with fear and anger. He held up his hands, as if to calm me. "I know you're scared. I promised to tell you the truth, and I will." But he stopped, looking down the alley, where the shadow I'd seen seemed to move again. "It's not safe here. Someone's following me. Following you." My voice shook. "Who? What's going on?" "Liam." He grabbed my arm, pulling me closer to the wall. "It's not just about me, Emma. There are things I can't control. During Lent, everything gets worse. I can't tell you everything right now, but you have to trust me. Trust you." I snapped, feeling my anger rise. "You disappear every night, act like nothing happened, and now you drag me into a dark alley? I saw you in the bayou, Liam. You weren't normal." His eyes darkened, and for a moment I swear I saw something flash in them, like the reflection of an animal. "You didn't see what you think you saw," he said, but his voice was tight, almost desperate. "Please, Emma, go home. I'll come find you tomorrow, I swear." Before I could respond, a low, guttural sound came from the alley, a growl that made my blood run cold. Liam turned his head toward the sound, and his whole body went rigid. "Go now," he whispered, pushing me toward the alley's exit. I ran, not looking back, my heart in my throat. When I reached Frenchman Street, the roar of the crowd enveloped me, but it didn't erase my fear. I looked down the alley one last time, and I swear I saw two figures in the darkness. One was Liam, the other, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human. I spent the night locked inside my house, with the curtains drawn, and my phone turned off. I couldn't sleep, not after that growl, that shadow, the look on Liam's face. He was hiding something more than a family secret or a personal problem. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I really wanted to know what it was. What happened that night on Frenchman Street left me more afraid than ever. The growl in the alley, the shadow that didn't seem human, the desperation in Liam's eyes, it all haunted me. But despite my fear, I couldn't let go. There was something about Liam Hayes that pulled at me, as if our fates were intertwined by a thread I couldn't cut. He promised to tell me the truth, and I was determined to listen, even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew. The next night, Liam asked me to meet him on Bayou St. John, in the same vacant lot where I'd seen him act so strangely. It was April 16, 2024, and Lent seemed to grip New Orleans with an invisible hand. The air was heavy, and the full moon lit the sky like a beacon. I arrived at the location with my heart in my throat, holding a flashlight that trembled in my hand. Liam was there, alone, sitting on a fallen log, his face buried in his hands. "Emma," he said, looking up as I approached. His voice was hoarse, almost broken. "You shouldn't be here, but I know you won't leave until you know. No more secrets." "Liam," I said, crossing my arms to hide the trembling. "I saw you that night. I heard that sound." "What are you?" He stood, and for a moment I thought he was going to run away. But he only took a few steps toward me, stopping a few feet away. "You've heard the stories of New Orleans, haven't you? About things you can't explain, that live in the shadows?" He laughed, but it was a humorless sound. "I'm one of those things." My stomach lurched. "What are you saying?" Liam looked up at the moon, and his eyes glowed in a way that made me shiver. "Every Lent, when the full moon rises, I change. I'm not me anymore. I become a monster, a werewolf." I wanted to laugh, to tell him it was crazy, but the pieces started to fall into place. The nighttime disappearances, his mother's aggression, that growl in the alley. "You're serious?" I whispered, feeling the ground disappear. He nodded, his face contorted in pain. "It's a curse, Emma. It's passed down through my family. I try to fight it, but during Lent it's worse. The monster takes over. That's why I disappear. To protect you. To protect me?" My voice came out louder than I'd intended. "You left me in the dark, Liam? I thought you were going crazy." "I know," he said, stepping forward. "But I love you, Emma. That's why I wanted to keep you away from this." Before I could respond, a noise came from the woods, branches snapping, heavy footsteps. Liam stiffened, his eyes fixed on the darkness. "They're here," he whispered. "Who?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Suddenly, 3 figures emerged from the trees, men with grim faces and guns that gleamed in the moonlight. One of them, with a scar on his face, pointed a shotgun at Liam. "You know why we're here, Hayes," the man said. "You broke the rules. You got involved with her." Liam stood in front of me, his fists clenched. "Leave her out of this." I didn't understand any of it, but fear paralyzed me. It all happened too fast. Liam yelled for me to run, but before I could, one of the men fired. The sound was deafening, and Liam fell, blood streaming down his chest. I screamed, running to him, but the men disappeared into the woods as quickly as they had appeared. "Liam, no, please," I cried, holding his face. His eyes were open, but the light in them was fading. "I'm sorry, Emma," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." And then he lay still. I don't know how long I lay there, crying over his body. The police arrived, alerted by someone who had heard the gunshot, but the scene was a mystery. There was no trace of the men, no explanation for what had happened. Liam was taken away, and I was left with an emptiness I could not explain. Weeks later, I went to the St. Louis cemetery, where he was buried. It was a quiet night, and Lent was over, but the pain was still intense. I placed a flower on his grave, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" I whispered as if he could answer. That night, when I returned home, I fell into a deep sleep. I dreamed of Liam. He was on the bayou, with that crooked smile that had won me over on Frenchman Street. "I thought it was better to die, Emma," he said, his voice soft but firm. "They would never leave you alone while I was alive. You are safe now." I woke with tears streaming down my face, his voice echoing in my head. I don't know if it was just a dream, or something more, but a part of me believed he had made a choice that ruined him, but somehow saved me.